Welcome to episode 244. You're listening to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with resources to navigate the challenges and opportunities of courageous, Christ-centered leaders.
Now, last week we explored the levels of listening. This week, the question we want to explore is, am I listening to God in and through the people around me?
And as a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with the previous 3 episodes in this series at transformingmission.org/244. We're continuing our series on the essential leadership skill of listening. Why are we talking about listening? It seems there's been a continual decline in people's ability, capacity, and desire to listen to one another. Today, we're exploring the question of listening to God in and through the people around you through the story of one person's life. Tim, will you get us started with that story?
Sure. It's a story of Vincent Van Gogh. He was a successful art dealer, even at age 24. But he knew that there was more that God had given him to do, and so he was struggling with what to do with his life. No one seemed to be able to answer his restlessness. But the person he went to all the time was his brother, Theo. Theo seemed to know him best and encouraged him in the midst of being the successful art dealer. He encouraged him to become an artist. But Vincent refused his brother's advice. Maybe I should say it this way. He didn't listen to his brother's advice. And instead, he left a promising career as an art dealer and began studying to be a teacher. Now, listen, I understand being a teacher is a great life decision. But for Vincent Van Gogh at that point in his life, it was the beginning of a harmful pattern. Because within the year, it became apparent that he would not make it through the rigorous training required of teachers. He didn't have the temperament to be a teacher. He didn't have the talent to be a teacher. So he goes to his brother again, Theo, for advice. Remember, he didn't listen to Theo the first time. But against the encouragement of his brother, his parents, and other relatives, he didn't become an artist. He decided to become an evangelist. And again, I say being an evangelist is a pretty good life decision. But for Vincent Van Gogh at that point in his life, it was a continuation of a harmful pattern. That pattern for Van Gogh was he had a difficult time receiving the counsel and coaching of others. Let me say it this way. He wasn't listening to the people around him. It seemed as if he had a strange sense of who he was. And at this point in his life, as religious as he was, instead of trusting God and others with his life, he trusted only himself with himself. He couldn't hear God speaking to him through the people around him. He just refused to listen to the people, and particularly the people who loved him and cared for him the most. So no matter what his vocation, his behavior was a sign not of spiritual maturity, but of a well-masked pride and arrogance. He knew more about it, and nobody could say anything to him about it.
So here's where we want to ask you the question. Are you listening to God in and through the people around you? Only as an example, and not to be overly critical, I want to say that over the years of ministry, I've met people like Vincent Van Gogh, people who have been very talented and skilled in what they are doing, people who can think for themselves and communicate well, but who also think they can maintain a personal relationship with God while avoiding the relationships of everyday human interaction. I've heard them say things like, well, my faith is private. It's between me and God. They believe they could experience all that God had for them without ever receiving the love of others. Vulnerability for them was often seen as a weakness. Many of them isolated themselves, and sometimes the isolation was based on ideas of purity or hard work, and at other times it was based on spiritual superiority. I've heard them say things like, I have to work hard for what I have. I've heard them say, I have worked hard for what I have. I am blessed.
Here's another place to ask that question. Are you listening to God in and through the people around you? Let's take a quick look at the life of Jesus. It might help us answer the question. Jesus intentionally chose to live and work with fallible and ordinary people. And according to the stories in the Gospels, the 12 disciples were not the model of perfection. Jesus broke with the customs of his day. He allowed women into his inner circle. And even in the home of a rich and famous, Jesus allowed Mary Magdalene to minister to him. There are many other examples of vulnerability. He chose a lifestyle of vulnerability over isolation.
That was where it was.
That's where it was.
But on the opposite end, in our example of Van Gogh recoiled from vulnerability. He chose to abandon all of his relationships except the one with his brother. Even with that relationship, he refused to listen to Theo's ongoing insights into his artistic gifts. Van Gogh rejected the counsel and coaching of church leaders regarding his service, and in his isolation, he wallowed in self-pity. He said he wanted to live for others, but all his actions proved differently. Ultimately, his remorse brought him to the point of giving up his faith. He became disappointed with God because God did not reward his self-denial and pure aspirations to love his fellow humans. I find it interesting that Van Gogh never considered that God did not abandon him, but rather was speaking to him in and through the people who loved him, who counseled him, who coached him. So let me ask again, are you listening to God in and through the people around you?
Yeah, Van Gogh finally found his calling as an artist. And I think it was in a particularly dark moment in his life that he wrote to his brother Theo, I said to myself, I'll take up my pencil again and I'll take up drawing. And from that moment, everything had changed for me. He finally found his calling, but in doing so, he had abandoned the relationships he longed for and needed, including his relationship with God. And as a result, his capacity for creating art became a curse to him instead of a blessing. Now, through his artistic career, Van Gogh persisted in ignoring the advice of those who cared deeply for him. He left a trail of broken relationships. He pursued his painting with such an obsession that he demanded people accept his terms for living and loving. His lonely life became representative of a person misunderstood and unloved by an antagonistic culture. One tragedy of Van Gogh's career was his refusal to listen to the guidance of others. If he had listened to those who he could trust, he would have begun painting much earlier in life and probably avoiding the frustrations and pain of choosing unwisely.
So the greatest tragedy of Van Gogh's life was he couldn't love others because he was not fulfilled himself. He would not allow God or others to meet his deepest needs. Can you imagine what he could have produced had he found his dream community of artists pursuing art for the common good? But his desire to control and manipulate the lives of others got in the way. Van Gogh drove people away. He would not allow people to come close to him, alongside him, to help him develop his real talents and his strengths. He wouldn't allow those closest to him to address his personality flaws, his weakness, or his poor habits. With all of that we've said about Van Gogh, what final reflections would you like to offer, Tim?
Sarah, first, it comes to mind to me that it was not his art that brought him down. It was his heart. It was his relationship with others. And as I ask that question again, are you listening to God in and through the people around you? Maybe the question isn't so much for you as a leader, but maybe also for your congregation. Take it seriously. Are you listening to the community in which you're located? As I think about local churches, we can no longer be isolated. We can no longer be doing our own thing and really expect the community to pay attention to us. Could it be that some of the struggles we have in our local churches is that we have a community that's saying to us, we're here, you could be in relationship with us, and we keep saying, but we're going to do what we've always done, the way we've always done it. What would happen if we began to listen to God in and through one another and the community? You know, just like Van Gogh, we might just find our true calling. I remember a song I used to sing as a teenager. I'm not going to sing it for you now, but the words are, hey, hey, anybody listening? Hey, hey, anybody there? And then the chorus goes, I've got good news, good news, good news, good news. Hey, hey, anybody listening? I think we take that to mean that God's speaking, and are we listening? We could take it as, I have something to say, and you need to listen to me because I've got good news. It may very well be that God's saying, hey, hey, are you listening? I'm sending people to you every day. I've got some good news for you. Are you listening?
I think you've said it, Tim, so I'm not going to add anything to that. You've named the question, are you listening? You can find highlights from this episode on the show notes page at transformingmission.org/podcast, and you're looking for episode 244. Remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.